Hey guys, Vahlkx here, and today I'm going to go over my updated bunny build here for Season 1. And the reason for that is because with this new season came in a new catalyst system, and so now we're able to catalyze a slot multiple times, and then we can hot swap the icon that we want. So this pretty much allows for more build diversity, and with that I've tried out different builds I've always wanted to try out. Some of the builds are kind of similar to preseason, but now you have options and just more diversity. So I'm just going to go over that, show you guys what I've been running, and kind of talk about how well they perform in different content. Before I do get right into the builds though, I do want to talk about the catalyst slots I have going. And so if you're planning to build up all the builds I have running, this will be a total of 10 catalysts. But if you were to just follow my main one, which is going to be my farming one here, you're only going to really need 8. And unfortunately, the catalyst before this update, so during preseason, they didn't carry over unless it was, a slot the Descendant came with. So I do have like more catalysts technically, like slotted on Bunny, which is shown here on this tab. So I have 14, but in reality, it's only 10. Anyways, we'll be going over my first build here, which is my farming build. And if you've seen my previous build video on Bunny, which was during the preseason, you'll see that this is pretty much the same thing as one of the builds I showcased there. But right now in Season 1, this is going to be my main farming build for pretty much everything, which just includes general farming and the new invasions that they came out with. But yeah, I'm going to just get right into the details of it and talk about what I did with this build. For the first mod here, we'll be talking about high voltage. And so this one is pretty much a must-have on most Ultimate Bunny builds because of the damage potential you get out of it. It's pretty hard to pass up on that. And then on top of it, you also get increased range, and then it does bring down the cooldown here from 30 to 22 seconds. Now with this mod, you are sacrificing AoE potential, but honestly with the content and mob density right now in the game, it's not that big of a deal because I've never found my farms to be like slowed down because of it. If anything, I've found it to be a little bit faster because of its range and just damage increased. Now I'm going to start off with the survivability mods, and so right now, I just run 2 health mods, so I have the regular blue increased HP, and I have the purple one, HP amp, because honestly, shields right now they're not the greatest thing, so that doesn't really matter. And for this one, if you're using HP amp, it's almost a 1-to-1 trade-off from that shield loss to the max HP. For my damage mods, we'll be using focus on electric and then singular specialist. For this build, you don't need to have 2 focus on mods because just having one will be enough to bring down the cooldown, to have the constant uptime between the cooldown and the duration for this ability. On Bunny, since she is pretty much mainly a farming character, it's pretty much a must-have to have double range mods, and so you want to be able to hit as much enemies as possible and hit them sooner, so you can kind of just clear waves faster. And so we're using maximized range and the skill expansion right here. For sustaining the build, we'll be using MP Collector to just get MP back from the enemies. And then on top of that, we have maximized conservation for the most amount of skill cost reduction for mods. And then you see that it loses skill power modifier, but you don't really notice that. Like, you still one tap enemies, so it's whatever on that. But having these 2 mods will help kind of run for a long time for bunnies too. For my last 2 mods, we'll be building up some crit. And so for this one, we got crit rate and we got the crit damage on those 2 blue mods. Now, I've mentioned this before, but during the preseason, I did try out a full setup on 4 crit mods, and I did not like it at all because of the amount you kind of sacrifice out of the build. And honestly, that kind of build, having 4 crit mods, is only viable on bossing. But now with like how far we are into the game and like the characters we have right now, there are just so many better options for bossing, which makes Bunny, as she has kind of always been, just a mainly mobbing, farming focused character. Which is why, I never liked the 4 crit mods and didn't really build into it. So this build is what I use for everything, for just both farming and doing invasions. But if you wanted to, because, in farming, you pretty much don't get touched when you kill the enemies. So instead of having the increased HP here, what I decided to do with the new update is change this to an X. And so what you would do is change that to an X, and what that allows you to have is to slot in dangerous ambush, and so this will give you kind of the biggest like modifier to your damage there, and it works even when the enemies aren't targeting you. Like, this was a thing even during preseason. I just didn't have the slots to fit it in there, and I didn't want to recatalyze at the time, knowing that this new system would come out. So easy swap right there, put Dangerous Ambush right there for the first increased HP. You'll do more damage, you'll have a little bit less survivability and health, but it shouldn't affect you too much. My reactor in this build is going to be this one, so we have electric and singular damage boost on that, and then the substats follow the same thing with singular and electric. And for me, I like those substats because this will boost both non-crit and crit damage, so this will pretty much work on any build. For my components, I'll be using 2 Annihilation, and this will help with the uptime on the third ability. And then I have 2 Supernova, which will just boost, overall damage as Bunny with the modifier there. But the way I have the pieces set up, they all give me defense. So the reason I do that is because I don't run a defense mod for this build. So this will give me that 20k plus defense right here, and then the 9k plus health, which I find to be very comfortable for just any content in the game right now. And then on top of that, for each component, you're pretty much just going to be looking for max stats. So you got max HP, MP, defense, and shield. And then the secondary thing you want is going to be MP stuff. So, MP recovery on all of those pieces. And then you can't get it on the here. So for this one, you'd probably want something like shield regen. But that is pretty much the stats you're going to be looking for here. For the second build here, we'll be going over my bossing build on Bunny. And honestly, I don't really use this often anymore because, like I said earlier, there are just better bossing characters out there. But if Bunny is the only character you have or the only one you want to play, this is a build you can follow. But I'm just going to quickly go over kind of the changes I made to it compared to the farming build. On this one, we're keeping the damage mods the same. So we've got Focus on Electric and Singular Specialist to boost that up, and also keep the uptime on our third between the cooldown and duration. We're keeping the 2 crit mods, so we've got crit rate and crit damage, and so whenever we do crit, we are doing more damage. For survivability, we're going to be keeping the 2 HP mods, and then on top of that, we're going to be adding more defense. And so instead of having 2 range mods, which you don't really need in bossing, we're going to switch maximize range for spear and shield. This will give us the defense that we need to kind of boost that up and give us a little bit more skill power for damage. And then instead of conservation, we have agony because you don't really need skill cost reduction in bossing. And plus the max MP kind of acts as, more sustain. And then on top of that, we get a little bit more defense. And then finally, we are going to be using Dangerous Ambush. So if you're using this in group play, this is very strong. And this is still very strong in solo play because when the boss does get downed, you are going to be getting that bonus skill power for just more damage. For the bossing build, the reactor I'm using is going to be, again, singular and electric. And then for this one, the substats are going to be attack on Colossus and then crit damage. So I'll just be doing a lot more damage to the Colossus, and that is especially so when I do crit. For the components, you're going to be going for Slayer, and same thing with the substats on all of them. You're looking for the max stats and then the recoveries that I talked about earlier. And you are going to be running Slayer for the bossing because you're really looking for the increased skill power to just do more damage. From this point on, the next 3 builds I'm going to be showing you pretty much follow the same idea as the main farming build. They still perform very well. I've tried all of them in the invasions, and I've been able to do them just fine. But I have these 3 builds mainly to kind of just change it up so I'm not stuck using, the one same thing over and over, just to have, something different. But if you wanted to, you could also use this, or if you don't like high voltage, these work. So yeah, I'm gonna get right into those. On this 3rd build here, we're going to be using electric condense instead of high voltage. And so what they don't mention on here is that when you do use high voltage, you will get a sprint speed increase. And so this will ever so slightly speed up some farms. It's not that drastic, but of course, the main thing you're getting out of this is that extra burst damage with the condense ability. Because, as Bunny, you should be constantly moving around, and you're pretty much going to be having full electricity. So this kind of adds on to another ability you can use to just dish out more damage. On this build, we're going to keep the damage mods the same. So we've got Focus on Electric and Singular Specialist. For survivability, we're going to be keeping HP amp. And the reason for that is because, like I said earlier, this is almost a one-to-one trade-off with HP and shield. But HP is a lot more valuable in this game because you can pick it up on the ground. Compared to shields, you have to wait for it to regen. To add on to just a little bit more survivability, but mainly we are going to be using this for extra damage. We're going to switch out the crit mod here for an R slot, and we're going to be using Spear and Shield for, again, defense and damage. For sustain, we're going to keep MP Collector for getting MP back from enemies, and Conservation here will help for just a longer sprinting. Because this is still, a farming build, we're going to be keeping the 2 range mods to just hit as many mobs as possible. And finally, for the last mod, we're going to be doing what I talked about in the first farming build, where instead of having, 2 health mods, we're going to take one out, we're going to put an X slot right here and put Dangerous Ambush. So with this one, like even in preseason, I've always wanted to use it for just a boost in damage, but with how limited we were with modding our builds, you couldn't really fit that in there, and I didn't want to spend, an extra catalyst to do that, but now we can do that. So for these ones, they will have Dangerous Ambush just for the extra damage. For the reactor on this build, we'll be keeping it the same as the first one that I showed. This one will have the singular and electric boost, and this is overall just a good, well-rounded reactor to have as bunny. And for my components, you have 2 options. You can stay with the 2-2 on Annihilation and Supernova, or because this one does have defense mods now, so you don't need that 40k plus defense. If you wanted more health, you would just switch out these 2 Supernova pieces for a full piece of Annihilation. So now we've got 4 Annihilation going. You do lose out on the modifier from Supernova, but the damage difference is 10k. That is not noticeable. You're still going to be, one-tapping mobs, so it's whatever of a loss, but this will just give us more survivability for this build. For this 4th build here, it's mainly going to be following the same idea as the Condense build with like the mods that we swapped, but instead of having Condense, we'll be using Electric Transition. And then what this does is it will cut the electricity we kind of gain as we're running around into 1/6 of the speed, but we will be regenning our shields, which is a good add-on to survivability. And then this part doesn't really matter too much, but it will cost the initial MP cost in half, so do what you will with that, but it's not that crazy. Like I said earlier, this build mainly follows the same thing as the Condense one, but it's more shield based because we are regenning it with the Transcendent mod. And so if I swap to the Condense one, the only thing we change here are going to be 2 mods. So instead of HP amp, we've got HP conversion into shield to just boost up the shield right there. And then instead of spear and shield, we've got increased shield to again just boost that up as much as possible. The reactor on this build will stay the same as the one I previously talked about, but the components will change. And so what I do with this one is I will be using 2 bravery. So this will give me max shield for the main stat, and then the set bonus will also give me more max shield. And then we're going to be using 2 supernova right here for, again, the extra power modifier right there. And then this will also give me more shield and then more defense right there. So this one, you do lose out on a lot of defense, but it's whatever. You have 5.6k shields right here. And then, on top of that, you're regenning it constantly with the Transcendent mod. So personally for me, I haven't found myself dying with this build. I've found it to work just fine for both farming and for the invasions. So if you wanted to use this build, this is definitely an option. For the final build here, we're going to be going over a Bionic fuel build, and I'm just going to say this now, this build is not good at all compared to like the very beginning of the game, because in the beginning we didn't have, built up mods or characters, and we didn't have the right equipment or components. So this build was decent for like having unlimited sprint, but like I said, now that everything's kind of built up, we don't really need this one anymore. This is just, again, another option for you to use. And if you don't know what Bionic Fuel does, it will be using HP instead of MP. And then on top of that, instead of having the sprint speed at 50%, it will bring it down to 30%. So that 20% difference is noticeable on this build. But like I said, this was only really good in the beginning of the game. It's not really that great now, but I'm still going to go over it if this is like an option you want to do. My main reason of building this up was because on the first day of the new season, I finally did get Shield Collector. So I wanted to just try that out. But, with this build, we are going to be using Shield Collector. And then similar to the previous one, we want to, increase shield as much as possible. So we've got increased shield right here. And then we got the HP conversion for shield to just bump it up. For the damage mods, we'll be using Electric Specialist instead, because we don't need the cooldown on top of damage. And then we also have skill simplification, just boost the modifier as much as possible. And MP doesn't matter for this build since we are using health. As for the cooldown for this build, we'll be using MP conversion, because again, MP doesn't matter, and then this will help just have the uptime there without having to have any focus on damage mods. Again, since we're doing farming, 2 range mods to hit as much enemies as possible. And then for this R slot, instead of having the damage mod, we've got Spear and Shield to kind of help boost up a little bit damage. And then of course, there is the defense on that. And finally, for my last slot is going to be multi-talented. So multi-talented will do less damage compared to Dangerous Ambush as of now. But I didn't want to put an extra catalyst in just to change that to an X, because I don't use Bionic anymore. And, the other builds I went over are just way better than this one. So instead of, having Ambush, I have multi-talented there just to help boost damage a little bit. And for this build, same thing. We're going to be using the same reactor and then same components as the Condense build. As for my ranking with each build, I pretty much goes left to right in terms of farming. Like we're going to be ignoring the Bossian one. But for farming, my main one and my most favorite is the high voltage one. You get so much range out of it. You get a lot of damage out of it. You lose out on the AoE potential, but everything else about it in terms of like sustain, damage, and survivability is just really good and balanced. So you can use this for just general farming or for the invasions, no problem. And second, we have the Condense build, which again has good survivability, sustain, and damage. Now the damage isn't going to be as much as high voltage, but with this, you're still one-tapping enemies. And of course, what is good about this is that you will have more AoE potential because you're not having high voltage, kind of cut down on that. And on top of that, you will have more burst when you are using electric condense. And third, we have transition. So again, this has good survivability, sustain, and damage. But the problem with this one is that you're not going to have as much burst damage compared to condense with the ultimate. And then on top of it, you're going to be generating less electricity, but you will be having more survivability by regenerating shields. And finally, in fourth is Bionic, which is sad because, early game, this was very good for just having the unlimited sprint, but now it doesn't really matter using this. But this one, in terms of damage and, sustain, it's there. Like you have plenty of it. But of course, because you're using Bionic, you're going to have less survivability. I've had more problems with this one when I was running invasions, but I was still able to get it done. But like I said, just there's more problems of me having to, be aware of my shields and health to survive. But this one works, it's an option, but I think all the other builds before this are just, performing way better than this. One more thing I want to mention is the use of Decimator, because I've been asked about it before as to why I don't use it. And the reason for that is because if you one-tap the mobs as Bunny, you're not going to be building these stacks on Decimator because you're not actually applying the debuff and then defeating them. You're just straight up defeating them. So you won't be building that up. And plus, having something like Dangerous Ambush or Multi-Talented is a lot more consistent, and you're probably going to be getting much more damage out of that in general, because this Decimator mod is a modifier and it's not a power compared to, Dangerous Ambush. So you're kind of just getting more damage out of that. That just about does it here for my updated bunny build here in season 1. So all the builds are pretty effective for general farming, but in terms of the invasions, the rankings I did talk about at the end kind of reflect my success and enjoyment of playing the builds. But yeah, I hope this helped you guys out. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.